Welcome to Deconstructed. I'm Ryan Grimm. A few weeks ago, for what we thought would be the first show of the new year, we connected with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal and Jasmine Ruddy. Ruddy is a lead organizer on Medicare for All for National Nurses United, a nurses union that has been pushing Medicare for All since its founding. But as we were getting ready to put the show out,
we're seeing protesters overcome the police. The police are now running back into the Capitol building. We have cheers from the protesters that are watching behind the scenes.
So plans changed, and we re-interviewed Jayapal about her harrowing experience in the House gallery as rioters tried to smash their way through the door protecting her and roughly a dozen other trapped members of Congress. You can go back and listen to that episode if you haven't yet, where she also talks about getting infected with COVID after being crammed in a room for hours with maskless Republicans. Yet as the feds continue their insurrection roundup, there are still more than 30 million people uninsured in America and millions more underinsured. A crisis at any time, but particularly so in the midst of a pandemic and extreme economic precarity. Sometime later in February, Jayapal will be reintroducing the Medicare for All legislation she first put forward in 2019, and the Nurses Union is launching a nationwide effort to pressure Democrats to co-sponsor it. The nurses had their first strategy call of the year recently, with over 1,000 activists laying out the plan for the year. They'll be targeting Democratic members of Congress who are the largest recipients of cash from the healthcare industry and are standing in the way of reform. At the same time, they'll be releasing a list of the 10 to 20 Democrats on the fence who can be nudged with a little pressure. They're also organizing in every congressional district. In the meantime, the pandemic is opening up opportunities to immediately expand public health care to millions who need it. For more on that, we're joined by the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Representative Pramila Jayapal, Congresswoman who represents Seattle, Washington. Congresswoman Jayapal, welcome back to Deconstructed.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
So 2 years ago, back in January 2019, after the midterm blue wave, Democrats had just taken over Congress. Pelosi's running for another term as Speaker. What was the Congressional Progressive Caucus thinking? What was the strategy going into those negotiations 2 years ago over the rules package, over committee assignments, over votes for leadership? What were your priorities, and how did you go about trying to achieve them then?
Well, our number one priority was to actually change the composition of key committees that have a lot of authority around budgetary implications and also progressive policies that are very important to us. And so what we realized in doing our assessment is that progressives are really underrepresented on those key committees like appropriations and E&C and others. And so we went into Pelosi and the negotiations and said, we want as a top priority for progressives to make sure that we have at least 40% representation, which is the representation of progressives in the Democratic caucus. And she agreed to that, which was a big step forward. And we were actually able to get progressives on key committees. Now, we learned some things out of that. We learned that we should be very specific about who we want on those committees and make sure that those people were really tied into the progressive agenda.
Well, to unpack that, I think what you're referring to is for decades, the Congressional Progressive Caucus was kind of you just kind of sign up to be in it. And so you had a lot of people in it who were also in some of the more kind of right-wing ideological caucuses. And so what you're saying is that in a few cases, she met that target by saying, okay, well, here's somebody from the CPC. And you're like, oh, that's not exactly what we meant.
Yeah, that's right. And we actually had some people maybe even sign up for the Progressive Caucus right before that happened. So that led us to really consider the rules reforms package that we passed this year, and also our own CPC reforms package this year in terms of what we wanted to prioritize. We did also ask for elimination of PAYGO, but I will say that it came very late in the game. We hadn't done the work ahead of time.
Almost on the day of the vote, right? Or the day before the vote?
Pretty much. People in the progressive movement sort of elevated that as a priority the day of the vote. And it was too late. With these negotiations, you really have to do a lot of work ahead of time. And so we decided that we would prioritize PAYGO reform and MTR reform. That's the motion to recommit, which has also really been used against us multiple times to try to weaken legislation on the floor and essentially cause us to bargain against ourselves.
Right. And for people who don't live this, motion to recommit, that for years has been the opportunity for the minority party to get a vote on the House floor in opposition to whatever the majority is putting on. And it's really basically always used for mischief.
Yeah.
Like just trying to force the other party to take some uncomfortable votes. There's really no purpose beyond that.
That's right. Historically, the motion to recommit is basically a tool for the minority party to have a final opportunity, not consistent along the way, but this is the final opportunity to weigh in on legislation outside of what is the regular amendment process. But the modern motion to recommit has gone so far from that original intent. And now it is essentially a surprise policy proposal. Members see the text of a motion to recommit literally 10 minutes before we vote on it. And it undermines the spirit of regular order and thoughtful legislating. And really, it's just minimal, superficial gotcha debate. And usually it's used as a partisan ploy to offer poison pill legislative changes, often related to immigration, criminal justice reform, bad things that then can be used on a TV spot. The Republicans, historically, because it was procedural, they always voted against a Democratic motion to recommit when Democrats were in the minority. Democrats, unfortunately, did not do that. We did not hold together. And we often had some of our conservative Democrats voting with Republicans on those motions to recommit. So it was no longer procedural. It was really terrible and often targeting communities of color.
Right. So you wrote in your memoir that the surprise pay-go fight of 2 years ago that kind of blew up over the course of a day actually ended up having some positive repercussions for Medicare for All. Can you explain a little bit about how that came about?
Yes, it seemed like a strange opportunity, but one of the things I've learned in politics is you've got to take every opportunity you can find. And so when the pay-go issue suddenly blew up, we had the opportunity to say to the speaker that if we did not get a significant progressive win into commitment from her, that we would not be able to support the rules package. And that win was getting her to actually approve of and allow to happen, because that's how these things go, hearings on Medicare for All. That was the first time in the history of Congress that we've had hearings on Medicare for All. There was no actual legislative proposal like the bill that I introduced, in 2019, 140 plus page piece of legislation. Before that, it had just been a 17-page resolution for Medicare for All. And we turned it into actual legislation of how this would work. The speaker agreed to that, and we were able to, for the first time in the history of the House of Representatives, have hearings in key committees, the Rules Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, and the Energy and Commerce Committee on Medicare for All. With our hearings, the powerful testimony of Adi Barkan, of Don Berwick, the former administrator for Medicare and Medicaid services, who came and actually testified about why this was important. And we were able to bat back, frankly, so much of the Republican criticism and build momentum for our organizing effort across the country.
And what was the effect of those hearings internally?
Well, it was really great because we have, I think brought on many Democrats who were nervous, frankly, about signing onto a piece of legislation that's 140 pages that has a lot of detail in it. It's a lot easier to get Democrats to sign, or anyone to sign on to a resolution that's 17 pages than it is something that has detail that you have to commit to.
Now, there were some pundits and left-wing media personalities ahead of this vote who were urging the CPC to use the vote for speaker as leverage to extract a floor vote on Medicare for All. Why didn't the CPC end up taking that particular route?
Well, I'm sympathetic, obviously, as the lead sponsor of the bill, to people who are frustrated that we have not moved to a single-payer system yet. But the reality is that this is a very slim margin. The vote for speaker was between Kevin McCarthy and Nancy Pelosi. And throwing the entire chamber into chaos would have been very detrimental for the Electoral College vote and everything else. But more importantly, from my perspective, as the lead sponsor of the bill, who's done so much to try to build momentum and get sponsorship and move the bill forward in the legislative process, I didn't think it was a smart idea. I mean, for us to force a vote on Medicare for all before we are sure that we have the support, I think is a bad strategy. I think that if you are going to argue that the thing that we get from the vote is we find out who's for Medicare for all and who isn't, and then we try to primary the people that aren't, the reality is you already know that. I mean, we have the people who are for Medicare for all have signed on to the bill. The people who are not for Medicare for all have not signed on to the bill. So I don't know what we get by saying we're going to force a vote, have the vote go down. And for the people who think that it's going to pass, I can guarantee you from everything I've seen in Congress that it would not pass. We could do a lot to try to get more people to vote for it than are signed on to it, but it still wouldn't pass. We just don't have the majorities we need. And I think at this point with a president, a Democratic president, who has clearly staked out his ground, not for Medicare for all, I think we've still got work to do as a movement to actually be able to pass these things through.
There was a sense among some people that this moment was the moment that progressives in Congress had to use their leverage. And with this gone, there's no more leverage left. What's your analysis of that position? And what leverage does the CPC have going forward?
Well, we have a lot of leverage because it's a slim majority. At the same time, what I always tell people is remember that if we have a lot of leverage, so do others. So anytime you have a slim majority, and I served in the minority in a state Senate where all the power went to the middle or the most conservative Democrats and the most liberal Republicans. Because if you're a progressive, if you want to say, well, I'm going to withhold 5 votes or 10 votes or whatever it is for this bill, then if the bill suffers a defeat, the way that it's countered by the rest of the chamber is to make it more conservative and to actually get 5 Republicans to vote for the bill. So I think people just have to understand we've got to do this carefully and thoughtfully and well in advance. Things that come up at the last minute are generally very difficult to get through unless you've already been negotiating.
And when it comes to your leverage, it seems like what you're saying is that you would need to find bills that the House leadership can't move to the right and pick up Republican support. So that would have to be something that is so toxic to Republicans that there's no amount of moving it to the right that could help. And one of those, I guess, would be anything involving the Affordable Care Act.
That's right.
Republicans just politically, they can't touch anything close to Obamacare unless it's a full-on repeal of Obamacare. And so there do seem to be some fixes coming in the House to Obamacare. And I saw Ro Khanna say on Twitter that might be an opportunity for you guys to have some leverage, because there's no way Pelosi can go to Republicans and say, look, I'm trying to fix Obamacare, but the progressives are demanding this, that, and the other thing, and so I need some Republican votes to help me get these Obamacare fixes across the finish line. I assume she'd be laughed out of McCarthy's office for that. Is that the kind of direction that you're looking at?
That is exactly right. And if you look at the legislative agenda that the Progressive Caucus just rolled out, what you will see, if you look at the healthcare section for our priorities, are the things that we can do with Democrats that won't get Republican support in overall healthcare legislation, but why not pass a piece of legislation that drops the Medicare age to 50? Because in the context of the Affordable Care Act, the Republicans likely would not support it, but that would not be popular for seniors. So, for seniors, it would be very popular with seniors, obviously, overall. And so I think that these are the strategies that we have to think about, and we have to be very careful. Progressive Caucus has played both ways on the NDAA, that's the National Defense Authorization Act. Many of our most progressive members have never voted for an NDAA. 2 years ago, we thought we would try a slightly different strategy where we would work with the chair of the Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith, to get many progressive amendments into the House version of the NDAA and then hope that they survived in the Senate version. And so a few of us voted for the NDAA to see if that strategy would work. I'm a great believer that you got to figure out what's going to actually move your priorities. It did not work. We got them into the House version, and then they all not all. Family leave still ended up staying in, which was a big victory. But most of the things that we really were fighting for got stripped out of the final version that passed the Senate and the House. That's an example where Republicans are always going to end up voting for the NDAA at the end of the day. And it's a tough vote for a progressive to take when the top line number doesn't change on military authorization. So you're exactly right to differentiate between something like the Affordable Care Act or potentially even a $15 minimum wage, things that Republicans have said, no way, we're not going to do this, versus, for example, perhaps a transportation infrastructure package or other things like that. H.R. 1 is another example where we're likely not going to get any Republicans on. And so we were able to push last time around for really progressive additions to H.R. 1, and we're going to get a few more this time as well when that bill is introduced in late January.
Right, and that's the election reform and public financing, matching financing for campaigns for people who aren't following that. So on Medicare for All, what is the plan going forward? Javier Becerra is likely to be HHS secretary. He has supported in the past allowing waivers for states to create single-payer plans, state by state. Is that the route that the movement is going to invest its energy in, or what is the strategic path forward if a floor vote isn't going to get you there?
Well, I think there's two parallel paths. So we will reintroduce Medicare for All, my bill, probably the first week of February. And our hope is to really put pressure on so that we get at least as many co-sponsors as we had last time, hopefully by introduction day, but if not, soon after that. And we will continue to press for more hearings, which is really the path to laying the legislative congressional record for these things. These big policies don't happen without that. So in energy and commerce, in ways and means, in budget, because the Congressional Budget Office just did a great report on Medicare for All and the cost of Medicare for All. And John Yarmuth, the chair of the Budget Committee, is a supporter of Medicare for All. And so we hope to continue to lay that groundwork and continue to push. I don't think anything is out of the question. I just don't want to have a vote until I know that it can actually pass. And so we will continue down that route just as fiercely as we have before. At the same time, if you look at what I was able to negotiate with Don Berwick and Abdul El Sayed, who the three of us were the Bernie appointed people on the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force on Healthcare. I was the co-chair. That is a really good roadmap to where we want to go. We weren't able to get everything into that, but we got some significant victories and wins. And then related to that, yes, we've already requested a meeting with Javier Becerra. We're so excited that he's going to be the new secretary. He certainly understands the importance of a single payer system, and we hope we can work with him to really get us there and lay the foundations for what will be the most essential piece of providing healthcare to everyone by moving to just the single payer system, no private health insurance, everyone able to get the same care, expansive care that is needed.
And last question, I think one reason that you saw so much energy online around this fight over the speaker vote and what path to take Medicare for All in comes down to a couple things. And one of it is that the primary is over, the campaigns are over. And so energy, that people used to put into phone banking and knocking on doors, doesn't have a channel anymore. And the movement for Medicare for All wasn't giving people kind of an obvious way at the moment to express their anger. Like, who do we call? Who do we come after to move this forward? So over the next 2 years, for people who are angry, for people who want to see change happen faster than it's happening, what can they do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And we worked really closely with the main organizing groups who are all, on the same page with me about the strategy here. National Nurses United already has a signature petition campaign that people can go to get congressional members on board. There's a whole campaign that Public Citizen has run that they're going to re-energize again around getting localities and states to pass single-payer resolutions, Medicare for All resolutions. And there will be moments where we will really need people to weigh in loudly and get some of these things that we're fighting for into legislation in whatever way we can. I think all of those things will ramp up. And I know this is a really tough time for people. As the lead sponsor of the bill, I've done so much work on just trying to establish what we need to establish in order to move what would likely be the most major piece of legislation since Medicare and Social Security into being. That is not an overnight fight. It hasn't been an overnight fight. The only reason we've made the gains we've made is because people have kept their energy up and do feel passionately about it. But we just also have to recognize that you have to have the support, and you can't play into the hands of Republicans and others who want to defeat Medicare for all just so that we have a symbolic victory that doesn't actually move the ball forward. And I think that was the only consideration here, is what is really going to move the ball forward and get healthcare to every single person in this country, no exceptions, everybody in, nobody out.
Congresswoman Jayapal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan.
Bring the attention back to the